Hello! So today we're going to talk about seascapes, and I've got 4 essential tips that I've used for seascapes. Now, just before I start this video, I just wanted to let you know this. This was supposed to be out in the field. This was supposed to be down in beautiful North Devon, where I went to take photographs. However, the wind of Storm Kathleen was unbelievable. And it was a little bit like this. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm at the top, and at the top it's spectacularly windy. Holy moly! That was a clip taken from my time on the Sugarloaf, and as you can see, well here, you could hardly hear a thing. So unfortunately I wasn't able to video when I was there. But what I have done is I've taken a selection of my edits from that photo shoot. I've added a couple of other edits from different photo shoots just to give you some examples. So here goes. So 4 tips for seascapes. So the first tip is composition, really, really important. Then light, planning your shoot, and shutter speed. So I'm going to go into each of these, and I'm going to look at each of these and with some photographic examples for you. So I'm going to be starting with composition, and we'll go from there. So composition, first of all, in seascape. So this is the wonderful Black Church Rock down in North Devon. And you can see in this composition there are some really important elements to it. So first of all, I'm using an ND filter to just smooth out this water here to try and get a good reflection. The other thing I'm really looking at, especially here, is where I'm placing Black Church Rock. Now, I've looked at this composition quite a few times because I placed it slightly off-centered, so I mean it should be kind of cropped around about here. But there were 2 things to that. I really wanted the reflection to be as centered as possible. And I also wanted to incorporate these foreground elements. Now, incorporating foreground elements is really important in your composition, and it helps you to develop that kind of journey leading you through from the front, through into the reflection, into the Black Church Rock itself. Okay, so looking at composition in a completely different way. So this is my son. As I say, just a few days ago in North Devon. So this is an example of 2 things really, looking at things from a completely different viewpoint, so a close-up viewpoint, and also using someone as an area of interest in the image. So for instance, I'm using my son as a kind of focal point there, and kind of fitting him into the space. So try and use composition that allows you to have a kind of dynamic sense of leading you into that space. There's also just enough space here to allow enough space in the composition here to almost reflect that shape there within these lighter rocks, so it gives it a little bit of breathing space. Okay, so this composition, what I've been trying to show today are not straightforward compositions. So this is a composition where there's a diagonal at play, and I just loved all this flat rock in the foreground, and I thought, well, why ignore it? Yes, it blocks out the view from behind here, but there's this really lovely diagonal and this kind of dark, craggy diagonal between the rocks here, and then the landscape in the background. This is an example where a lot of landscape photographers, including myself, would get a little bit worried about it because most of it, again, is rock. But it's marrying up a composition with another composition. So there's a slight reflection here in this rock here, peeking out here, and then a much larger cliff face behind. I could have focus stacked it and made both in focus. I didn't really want that. I wanted to show the difference, and I wanted to keep it as kind of natural as possible. There are also these lines here paralleling here and here and here. And I just really liked the way that you've got layers in the background and you've got layers in the foreground. And those layers and texture, you don't have to use a traditional composition to get the landscape shots that you need. So in terms of composition, the one thing I use a lot is reflection. Now reflection is this Speke mill in North Devon, and I love this rock. Again, it was shot with an ND filter just to still out all those reflections and get a little bit of movement in the sky here. But again, starting to think about like what's important in the composition. I love the texture of the rocks around here, so why not leave them in? And we've got these diagonals coming across, but then we've got this reflection cutting through the middle. And trying to make slightly more kind of, I guess, compositions that really interest you, that you find dynamic and interesting, rather than just sticking completely to things like the rule of thirds and other types of composition. Now, I have looked into composition in more detail, and I'll put a video and a link up above now. So light in seascapes is absolutely essential. Really need to think about either getting there at the right time of day, which comes into one of my other factors, which is planning, but also where you're going to position that light. I think don't be afraid of photographing straight into the sun and just getting those beautiful light rays as much as possible. And this is an example of that. This is Porlock Weir. This isn't actually North Devon, but I put this in because in terms of light, it absolutely made the shot. This tree, without the sky and the colours of the sky, I've shot this tree before just on dull days, and although it's a beautiful tree, you really need those colours and lights in the sky to really bring out the composition here. Again, reflective surfaces at different times of day. Now, this was a shot that I took in North Devon, and this is literally just clouds reflecting on the sea. I loved this use of different colour, the fact that you've got these kind of bluey greys in the sky, and then you've got this kind of almost kind of light greens, dark blues, browns, greens. So, and part of this colour was being produced by the difference in sea, and maybe what was underneath it. But part of it was being produced by the casting of the shadows and the light. And then I just brought in a little composition element of this bird just to give it some kind of perspective and depth. So this is a classic example of just photographing into the sunset. When I photograph into the sunsets, I quite often zoom into them to try and get those clouds and get those details just where I want it to be. Now, the ISO of this was really important as well. That's something I'll talk about with shutter speed when I get into that in a minute. But the contrast and light here was really important. I was almost going to divide this into two, because you've got the blues and then you've got the warm colours. But I really liked the and what I was trying to get in this shot, and I took several shots, as I like these two lines of cloud in the sky, and I was trying to wait until I finally got these two waves in the sea. So I'm reflecting and echoing what's in the sky, and then the sun is deliberately in the center to give it that sense of stillness and focus towards the center of the composition. So waiting for the right lighting conditions is really important. Now this is just a fleeting moment when the sun came out of the grey. It was a pretty grey weekend, this, and there was just a tiny little patch of sunlight that just cast onto here to make that glow. Now the light was never as strong as I wanted, but I had to wait for this. So you can never always predict the light that you get in a composition. Now this, again, wasn't shot in North Devon. This was actually shot in Cornwall. But light-wise, the shooting away from the sun and looking at what the sun is reflecting is really, really fantastic. Now, this was the sunrise in Cornwall. Um, Again, composition-wise, very kind of based on the rule of thirds. Got 1/3 here and 2/3 for the sky. I really like this set of buildings coming in here. They're all quite uniform and completely contrasting to the textures in the cliff, the sky, and the cloud. Okay, so planning is another essential element for seascape photography. And this is a really, really important one. Checking tide times, checking the position of the sun using apps like PhotoPills. It really makes or breaks a seascape. So this is Blackchurch Rock again, last week, taken at low tide. And here's another example as the tide was starting to come in. But this particular location, without getting there at the right tide time, will completely kind of break your image. You know, at high tide at Blackchurch Rock, arguably isn't that interesting. It's quite difficult to photograph. You can't photograph the angle of these two holes here because you need to be way, way, way off to the right-hand side to photograph it. So it looks more like a lump of rock, more like this, because you can't even see the holes here. You can only see one here. But so planning is really, really important. It allows you to make sure that you get the right tide time, the right position of the sun, and that you're on the right part of coast where the sun is. Very, very often, you need to know whether you're only going to get a sunrise or a sunset, really, and you really need to work that out before you go. So this is an example in North Devon on Ilfracombe Beach. And again, I really wanted to try and get the contrast between these lovely black craggy rocks and the sun rising through them. And I had to really plan this on PhotoPills to get the right time of day and the right tide time and the right position of the sun. But this shot was all pre-planned. None of it kind of was just kind of seeing how it goes, because I knew that the sun was going to rise over here, and I knew that these black craggy rocks would make a fantastic image. So this is an HDR image with about kind of 3 or 4 layers stacked, exposing for the rocks, exposing for the sea, and exposing for the sky all separately. So shutter speed. So this is probably my biggest and most important one out of all in terms of seascapes. So you really have to go with the character of the sea. So for instance, this was Storm Kathleen. There were kind of 50, 60 mile an hour winds, massive waves crashing onto the rocks. If I'd cracked out a 10-stop ND filter and tried to produce a shot similar to this, for instance, which I'll come back to, it would have completely killed the atmosphere of the time, and I wouldn't have been able to properly reflect the kind of the feeling that these massive waves were evoking. So when you're photographing large waves and lots of movement, you do the opposite of the ND filter, really. You need to use very high shutter speed. So I would use anything over a 400th of a second. You need to still keep your aperture on about f11 or f8 because it still needs to be sharp. So the one thing you need to sacrifice is your ISO. Now this was taken on ISO 1600, and that is because you really, really want the shutter speed to be as fast as possible. I think this was 800th of a second. And because of that, you get all this lovely sea spray and all this detail. This was just after a wave. I took a shot with the wave hitting it as well, but I preferred this, the way that the white water was starting to drain off the rock. And I was really trying to kind of get that kind of atmosphere, that moody atmosphere. So this is another shot similar to the one I showed you previously in Hartland Quay. This time I've used less of this foreground rock and slightly more of the background. Basically, it's a similar composition. But what I really liked here was the fact that occasionally you got these massive splashes coming up here, so it forms a contrast between the white water here and the dark rocks, and then the white water back out to sea. And this again was Hartland Key, and this again was shot on a fast shutter speed. This was about 800th of a second, and it was on ISO, I think it was around about 3000. And in doing that, you still get all this sea detail. You don't get too much kind of blurry. In fact, there is a little bit. Maybe it wasn't 3000. Can't remember exactly. But it was the shutter speed was really, really, really important. It had to be fast in order to get this real contrast in the waves and the structure of the waves. Okay, so this one was shot on 3200 ISO on an 800th of a second. And what I really wanted with this one was no blurring in the water. I wanted to see every single moment. I went down to the water's edge just as the water was starting to reside. The sky was looking seriously moody. And out to sea on 200 millimeters, the waves were still crashing against the rocks. And what I was really looking for in this composition was basically dark light and then dark light again. So you've got this kind of sandwich between dark, light, dark, and then light, and then off into the moody grey. But this is what I was really, really aiming for with this particular shot. And then lastly, a completely different scene. So this is Speke waterfall, again a seascape. Well, it's on the beach. And this one I use my 10-stop ND filter. Now this is a completely different shot because I was trying to get that kind of smooth, gentle, flowing nature of the water and trying to contrast it against these harsh black rocks. And in order to do that, when I was doing these on high shutter speeds, yeah, you got the water trickling over, but the waterfall work, the water is quite often very uniform as it comes over. It doesn't kind of suddenly splash over like it does with sea waves. And because of that, I really wanted to get that kind of smoothness, that sense of kind of movement and rhythm as it comes down from the first, or the second waterfall. There's one bigger waterfall behind it, to the third waterfall, and then slowly flowing into the sea in this bottom right-hand corner. So, just to recap then. So first of all, in terms of seascape composition, what I was trying to get at, I guess, is that there are all the traditional rules, like the rule of thirds, golden ratio, reflection and symmetry. And I'll put up a link to some compositional advice from another video that I've got. But what I was trying to get at is composition that really kind of gets you, like composition that kind of excites you, using shapes, using viewpoints that you wouldn't necessarily think about using the first time around, and just exploring and experimenting with it. Light kind of falls hand in hand with planning, because you need to be able to plan, especially on the coastlines where I work, and kind of Devon and Cornwall and Dorset. You really need to know where the sun is going to rise or set depending on where you are. And that's utterly essential. So using photopills, using weather apps, and tide times are really, really important. And then the last one, shutter speed, it's fantastic. What I would recommend is this, to keep this really kind of straightforward. If you've got really kind of slow moving or similar moving water, like waterfalls, and you've got some kind of shape within the water, then use an ND filter, slow it down and create that kind of smooth creaminess in the water. If you've got a storm like I had, Storm Kathleen, then I would whack your ISO up really high, put your shutter speed up really high, get rid of the tripod, and just enjoy recording that storm and getting battered by the storm. Just keep yourself safe when you're doing it. I think that shutter speed really helps communicate the character of the seascape and that's probably why it's my #1 tip. So I hope you found that helpful. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.